If you're just joining in, welcome to Life in Motion Live. This is the first time I'm doing this. What I want to do is make sure everybody has a chance to ask their questions or communicate with me. So if you can hear me, go ahead and type hi. If you've got your chat window open, go ahead and tell me where you're dialing in from. Mount Prospect. Hi, Mark. Heather, can you hear me now? Paula from Taos, how are you? I wish I was there. I'm looking out the window at a lot of snow, and I hear there's another snowmageddon storm on its way. So in Chicago, it is lunchtime, so hopefully you've got a little bit of food in front of you if you're here and it's lunchtime. And take a quick look at attendance. Can you guys, I assume you can see my screen. Can you see me? Or you can't see me yet. There we go. How are you? How about now? Should have a little video. You can close me down if you like. But I thought I'd at least put that video out there, so that's me. All right, I'm going to give it one more minute, and then we'll get started. All right. How's the weather in Taos? Got Paula. Far too warm and dry. Oh. It's slushy here. Great. Okay, well, how to prepare for family emergencies. That's the first session I'm going to do in this series called Life in Motion Live. And I want to start with maybe a little bit about why I think this topic is important. So, my first major family emergency happened about 5 years ago, and my mom had a stroke. One of the things I remember vividly was being in the emergency room talking to the doctor. And he was asking normal questions, just your standard questions. Is your mom on any medication? He needs that information. I said, oh yeah, she's on thyroid medication. So that was the one answer I knew, but all of the information that he needed, what was the dose? Who's her doctor? What's it for? I didn't know the answers to those questions, and it was so stressful, and it felt really high stakes in that moment to not have those details. And in the end, it wasn't. They were able to treat her, and it didn't slow anything down, but it could easily have been a problem. My dad at that time was also being treated for cancer. And so I had, over the course of the last 5 years, the experience of over a dozen hospitalizations, various other kinds of family emergencies. And over time, I've had this experience of that first time being so stressful to, I've been able to learn what are some of the things that help make it easier. And that's what I'm here to share today. I'm going to go ahead and try and advance the slide here. Okay, my name's Karen Purze. I actually have a background in product development. So I've been, for the last 20 years, working at software companies here in Chicago, doing product management, product development, program management, things like that. But this experience of the last 5 years is what I sort of jokingly say it's radicalized me. And by that, I mean, I really think that this could be a lot easier if we talked about it more and if there were things that everyone kind of understood as information and steps they can take to make it easier. And so that's really what I'm about right now. I spent the last year as writing a book and doing some public speaking, and as an entrepreneur developing some products. So the book is really kind of maybe the master class in getting all your personal information organized. It's a workbook for getting your affairs in order. But really what I plan to do in this half hour is talk about the financial and legal steps you can take to set a good foundation, and then how you can also prepare the people around you so that they're best positioned to help you if you have an emergency. So those are the two main things we'll do in this call. As I said, if you have questions along the way, go ahead and type them in the chat. The chat is, again, you can access that from the floating menu at the top of your screen, hit chat, and then that window will come up on your screen. If the question relates to the slide I'm on, I'll try and answer it then and there. If not, there should be time at the end for a few questions as well. So keep that in mind. So with that, maybe give me a little yes in the chat window if you're ready to go. If you want me to dive into the materials, go ahead and type yes so I can see you're out there. I got a couple yeses, great. Couple yeses in, very good. Okay, people know how to use the chat, that's perfect. Thanks, guys. So what are the financial preparations that we can take to prepare for emergencies? Standard advice from, say, a finance professional or a personal finance advice is to create an emergency fund. And I would echo that same advice. If there is an unplanned, the nature of an emergency is it's unplanned, so you want to set aside some money in advance to cover any of your expenses. Not everybody has the same philosophy as my father. My father's personal finance philosophy was save until it hurts. Maybe that's not your style, but if you save a little bit along the way, that'll help in an emergency. Something I like to do is I have an emergency fund for living expenses if, say, I'm unemployed or if I need to, try and start a business randomly like I'm doing right now. But I also have a separate savings that is just for my deductible. Some of you may also have high deductible health plans. I have a very high deductible for our family. So we have a family of 4. Our deductible is over $5,000, so we'd have to spend over $5,000 before any medical expenses were covered. So I set that aside. In my case, I also use a health savings account, which is a tax-advantaged type of an account that you can open if you have a high deductible plan. So as you can imagine, if you have an emergency, it's not hard to burn through a lot of money quickly. So think about your living expenses, but also think about your health plan deductible. That's the main message on the emergency fund. Another thing to think about is, in terms of financial preparations, is disability insurance. So the Social Security Administration has a report, and it shows that 1 in 4 people, 1 in 4 adults will have a long-term disability at some point in their careers. That's a pretty big number. It was far bigger than I expected. So 25% of people in America have a long-term disability at some point in their career. And the average length of the claim is 34.8 months. So almost 35 months is the average length of a long-term disability claim. So having some coverage during that time when you're not able to work can really be a lifesaver. And that kind of coverage comes in 2 main forms. There's a number of different types, but one thing to think of, short-term disability covers a percentage of your salary for a certain amount of time. Depends on the policy what that amount is. But the other kind of insurance is long-term disability that takes effect after a certain amount of time that you've been disabled up to your retirement age. So again, the details depend on your policy, but and the reason I have this crossed out, it's not one or the other. They work in a complementary fashion. Short-term covers, an initial disability for a certain amount of time. Long-term disability generally would take effect after a kind of a lockout period. So looking at your options for disability insurance is an important step to take when you're thinking about preparing for an emergency. Sort of how will you survive during the time when you're disabled or temporarily unable to work. So a lot of employers have policies that are either at a discount, or some employers cover this for you. If you're not self-employed, you might want to check at what your options are, and if you've been opted into something, take a look at that. If you have the option to add that, if you want to pay a little extra for that, it's often at a discount to what you might find on the private market. So those are some important financial preparations. And now we'll talk a little bit about legal preparations. So if you are temporarily out of commission, who's going to speak for you? Who can, sorry. Who can act on your behalf if you can't talk, or if you can't think clearly, or if you're unconscious? So there are two primary documents. One is a healthcare power of attorney. That's a document that designates a person to make your treatment decisions for you. And then, as you can imagine, it doesn't take long for bills to pile up. So let's say you have a 3-week period where you're not able to do something. Maybe it's longer. My mom was in recovery for 4 or 5 months. A financial power of attorney document designates a person to act on your behalf in financial, legal, and property matters. So that's something else to think about. These are important roles. They don't have to be the same person. They don't have to be a family member. But giving somebody the legal foundation to sort of be in your corner and act on your behalf if you're out of commission is a really important step. So why don't we take a quick poll? I want to see kind of where you guys are at. I'm going to launch. This is anonymous, so go ahead and if you see a poll popped up on your screen, go ahead and click your answers there. We've got an answer or two. I'll give you guys a minute to take the poll, and we'll see where things are at. One thing I wanted to mention on the financial power of attorney, you can imagine, do you need a financial power of attorney for your spouse? Yes. In some cases, a bank, by policy, someone may agree to speak with you without that power of attorney in place, but it's not a guarantee, and so it's recommended that you have explicitly designated somebody to have that ability. You may have noticed, even if you call, I know that if I call even a utility, they won't always talk to me, because if a utility is in my husband's name, they won't even always talk to me. You need this document to kind of prove that you have that authority. Something to note, given that this is such an important, and oh, sorry, I'm going to end the polling and I'm going to publish the results so you guys can see what I'm seeing. Okay, so it looks like a good number of you do have the healthcare power of attorney. That's great, and fewer have the financial power of attorney. Something to consider. For the financial power of attorney, you have the ability to designate how broad those powers are and also when they take effect. So a healthcare power of attorney takes effect when a doctor says that you are incompetent or if you're unconscious and unable to speak or make those decisions. The power of attorney, you decide when it takes effect. I've been power of attorney for my father that was what's called a springing power of attorney, only took effect if he were declared incompetent by a doctor. I also had a limited power of attorney, a separate document from him just to sell his car. I have a durable power of attorney for my mother, which gives me broad powers to act on a day-to-day basis on her behalf because she's disabled. It just makes it a lot easier if there are things where you need to go somewhere, do something. I have that document, I bring it with me, I show it, and generally they then will allow me to do the transactions or whatever that I need to do. Okay, so you guys are in decent shape there. For those of you who have these documents, take another look at them just to make sure it's got all the information. Same people. I've created these documents and I've updated them twice now, once when I got married and once when my dad died because he was named in some of them. So take a look at those if you have them, and if you don't, these are, both of these documents are available. Some of you are in Illinois, you're not all, but many states publish free documents that allow you to sort of document this, notarize it, and make it official that way. I'm not recommending that necessarily, but I'm saying that basically that takes away some of the barrier to entry, I would say. So if you don't have an attorney or don't want to deal with that, there are other ways to get these documents in place, and I suggest you kind of take a look at that. So now that you've got somebody that's going to act on your behalf, what are you going to tell them? What's most important to you? How are they going to know what should guide their decisions? And I think intuitively we understand that this is, a personal thing, and it's different for everyone. But I think this is a really fascinating study that it shows across countries that there's quite a bit of variability in terms of what is most important to people. And I think really the point here is you don't want to leave it, don't take it for granted that people are going to know. And also don't take it for granted that it's going to be obvious. That's something that I found when I started to think about this, or when I talked with my dad, like, what are your preferences? He had he's terminally ill. So what are your preferences? He's like, I don't know. And that actually didn't surprise me, but this is not a one and done conversation. It's something that might have to take place over time. So something I think is interesting here. If you look at this, having your wishes followed is one of the, in the United States, blue bar is the United States. In the United States, it's one of the most important factors. So we'll take a quick poll. If you were guessing, how many people, let me launch this other poll. Let's say you're guessing, how many people do you think, out of all of these 85 or 90% of people who think it's the most important, how many do you think have actually documented it? So it's most important to have your wishes followed, but how many have actually done it in the United States on average? Got a couple guesses coming in. Maybe 2 or 3 more seconds, see what people have to say. Okay, we've got some pessimists in the crowd. I like that. I'm going to go ahead and share the results here. Okay, most of you guessed 15%. Maybe I phrased it in such a way that you made it seem that way. It's actually about 25%. I think it's interesting, even 25% of people who work in hospice, this is the number who have documented their wishes. So I think it's really, really, really important to have the conversation. Give it some thought yourself. I will send you guys an email after the call that will give you some resources for how do you start that conversation and what are some of the things to discuss and consider. But once you have that conversation, it's equally important to document it. And the way that you do that is in a living will. So a living will is a document that talks about your specific end-of-life care wishes. And when you have it in place, both your healthcare power of attorney or your healthcare proxy and your medical professionals are bound to follow what's in that document. So this is, what do you want to happen if you can't eat, if you cannot breathe? Do you want to be resuscitated? Do you want to be fed? That kind of thing, or anything else that you really think is important. You know, anything else you want your family to know if you can't talk to them at the end of your life. You want them to know how they should be conducting themselves when they're making their treatment decisions on your behalf. That's what you put in a living will. This is another document that's available from the Illinois Department of Health, or from often from different government sources. Have templates for this that are available. And again, I'll share some of that after the call. So this kind of makes it official. This is how you make your wishes known and official. Does a practitioner order for life-sustaining treatment, the POLST, is also sometimes known as a DNR. This is a medical order. So the living will has similar information. What do you want to happen if you can't breathe, or what do you want to happen, you know, in certain scenarios? But the POLST is a medical order. So that is something that, for example, an EMT, if you will show them a DNR, a paramedic comes to your house, they're likely, and again, rules vary by state and protocols vary by state, but you are more likely to have your wishes followed in an emergency if you also have a POLST. They will not look at your will, they will not look at, sorry, your living will, they will not look at that. Their responsibilities are to stabilize the situation, and you know, how and whether they follow your wishes depends a little bit about whether they have a medical kind of order describing your wishes. So this is a little bit of a belt and suspenders kind of thing. Living will helps your healthcare agent and your medical professionals know how to treat you as situations emerge. POLST is for emergencies. So you want to keep that nearby or on you, you know, in that, maybe in your car. Those are some of the scenarios. I mean, it's a little tricky, I think, to make sure that you have this with you at the exact moment that you need it. But in my mom's case, as an example, her DNR is on her refrigerator. She lives in a senior living facility, and they've instructed the paramedics that come into that building on a fairly regular basis to look at the refrigerator first before treating anyone in the building, just in case they do have a DNR. They can, you know, and I'm not going to do that in my house, but that's a case where it makes sense. If something goes wrong, a will or a trust, if something goes wrong and you die, the power of attorney documents are no longer effective. So they will not apply in cases where you're dead. A will or a trust is a document that describes how you want your assets distributed, what you want to happen with your belongings, and also who should manage the process. So those are all good things to have that explain what you want to happen in certain situations at the end of your life or if you die. So you have a financial foundation, you have set the legal foundation, you've found a person and a backup that can act on your behalf in both a medical or healthcare setting as well as financial, legal, and property. They know what your wishes are. Now it's time for you to take one more step, and this I think is where my family fell down a little bit, one more step to make it easier for them to actually fulfill the obligations of your advocate or your proxy. So personal health record is a document that you can create or that you can, and I'll have a download for you guys in the email I send after the call. The personal health record, these are all things that are easy for you to realize and understand and explain to somebody, but if you're not able to explain them yourself, they're very difficult things to track down without your help. If you've not got them written down, this is pretty stressful to kind of run around and find this information while you've also got someone you love in the hospital. So you want to empower the person that you've designated to be your agent, empower them with the information that will really be helpful to them. And so that's what's in a personal health record. And so, like, I think some of the information in this presentation, I think some of it's obvious, I think, to you. It's certainly some of you have these documents in place that we've talked about earlier. This is the case, this information is stuff that I thought was a little less obvious and certainly would have been a lot easier and was a lot easier to deal with emergencies when I had it in place. Another one, again, logistical stuff. Those were the killers for me. So an emergency plan. So what, if you are, in any household, there are things that you know and that you know how to do, and you don't think to write them down or explain them to anyone because they're obvious and because you don't think you need to. But if you're suddenly not able to help, you know, when my mom had a stroke, all this really good information was locked inside of her head and we couldn't get it out. We had to just reinvent and reverse engineer everything about what kept their life in motion. And this simple step of taking the time to write down how to access and secure your home, how to care for your dependents, if you have pets, you have kids, how do you manage your household routines and obligations. I remember a few years ago, a family friend's husband died, and she actually called my parents a few days afterwards and says, I really need some help. And she needed help finding her husband's car. So he drove to work downtown, parked in a parking garage as he normally did, but she didn't know where that was. And that was just a practical, simple thing. And in the template that I have for the emergency plan, there's a place for where do you keep your car. Simple things like that. When I sat down to do this and research kind of what's in an emergency plan and what would be helpful and thinking through what I needed to gather from my parents, it's actually the very same information that I used when I go to New Orleans without my kids. So if I want to go on vacation for a couple days, I need to document this for our babysitter. It's the exact same information. I have a template for it. It's free. I'll give that to you guys after the call. So those little practical steps for us were really kind of, it took a lot of time, it actually was a lot of stress to kind of not have that when we needed it. So these are steps I also recommend in terms of getting ready for any kind of emergency. Does anybody have any questions before I wrap it up? Very clear. Well, thank you. All right. Well, I will be sending you an email after the call. So if you have any questions that come up later, you give me send me a text or send me an email or give me a call. I want to just wrap up by kind of summarizing some of the things we just talked about, and then again reiterating that some of this might be obvious, but that doesn't mean you've done it, right? Or you might know about some of these things, but it doesn't mean you've done it. So it's simple, but it's not easy. And so really, I'm hoping that you've learned a little bit in the call about how to set the legal foundation, give somebody the authority, the legal authority to act on your behalf. That's a really important step. Some of the financial things we talked about, like an emergency fund or reviewing your insurance options, also can be very helpful in an emergency. Discussing, documenting, and sharing the information in your documents is important, in your plan. So discuss what your wishes are, make it formal in a living will and in a post, and then sharing that. Share the copy of the document, but also share the information and the decisions with others around you. So you want to make sure that the people in the document have a copy of it, have access to the original, and then anybody else that may be by your side in an emergency, let them know what you've decided. You don't have to explain yourself, you don't have to go into a lot of detail, but don't make it the healthcare proxy's job to tell everybody in the family, oh no, she said it's me, that I have to make these decisions. That happens, and it causes some strife, so think about that. And then empowering your agent. So the little details that kind of keep your life in motion, that's what you want to also take a little bit of time to document. I have my biggest hope for this call is that you've taken something from it and that you also are willing and prepared to take some action. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick poll and see what you guys think for you is the most important. So what's the most important step for you to take? Again, this is anonymous. Nobody's going to be judging or tracking what your answers are. I'm just, kind of curious to see, have you thought of something that you think, okay, I want to take care of that right now? Okay, we've got the open polling. Just a couple more minutes here. Not minutes, seconds. Great. I'm going to go ahead and end and share. So it looks like everybody has something different that they want to take care of, and I'm really, I'm glad about that. So I want to thank you for joining today. I'm going to go ahead and, so no matter what you do, before I finish, this isn't a race, and nobody has all of this done, I don't think. I don't. I have a lot of it done, but I don't have all of it. And or at least everything in the book I don't have. So anyway, I just really encourage you, get started and keep going until you're done, one foot in front of the other. I really hope you take some action. I hope you reach out to me. I'd love to stay in touch. As I mentioned, I will send one follow-up email with some links to some of the resources that I referenced in here and some additional information. You can follow me on Facebook. You can join my mailing list. You can just give me a call if you like. I really, again, appreciate the time, and I'd love to keep in touch. Thanks, everyone. Take care.